And we're live and it's 6 p.m. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this eBaithak on one of India's silent killers. We have two wonderful speakers today, Dr. Gayatri, Kotbagi, and Ruhaan. Let me introduce both of them. Dr. Gayatri works as a postdoctoral researcher on various projects in health and social psychology. She recently moved back from France to India to work on a research-funded project Research England-funded project that focuses on mental health in rural India. Gayatri completed her PhD in psychology from Université Paris Nanterre and continued working in psychology and mental health domains for over 10 years. She uses her academic training in clinical psychology and personal experience with mental health conditions to promote a blend of medical and social perspective to mental health. Welcome, Gayatri.
Thank you.
Has an abiding interest and over 13 years of experience in education, public policy, and governance. At the Center for Civil Society, he is currently curating an aspirational project that aims to equip 1 million children from low-income families with foundational skills in English. Mental health and its impact on the overall quality of life is an area of academic and personal interest for Ruhaan. He conducts group workshops and occasional individual sessions based on cognitive behavioral therapy and dialectical behavioral therapy, two frontline therapy approaches for treating various mental health conditions. Welcome, Ruhaan, and over to the both of you.
Thank you, Yazad. We are good to go?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. So wonderful, all 60 plus people who are in the room. We are really happy to see these many people showing an active interest in a topic which we, as Yazad said, something which is important, very relevant for the current times and has generally been relevant for a long time. It's great to see on the one hand that there is so much curiosity or readiness developing among people to talk about a topic which for a long time, which we consider almost as a taboo, morbid, something not to be discussed at the dinner table, something not to be discussed with your friends, to coming to a point where we are holding actually a complete webinar on that and people have volunteered to participate in it. So a big round of actually applause to all of you who have shown interest in talking about this topic. Gayatri and I both have had multiple chats about this. We independently have pursued mental health as well as the public policy side of it, which is something I will be talking about on today's session over the last few years. We must also say that a lot of this talk today or what we are sharing, the perspectives that we are sharing, also do come from a personal experience place, so that we are not leaving ourselves outside of what we are sharing today. So a lot of it will be perspectives, some of these will be some experiences, opinions, and we also encourage all of you to talk about different topics that come up during the session today. Very important for a topic, something like what we are going to talk about today. And Anas did say that some of you reached out to him talking about your mental health condition, something that you might be facing right now. First, I really appreciate your courage to write about it. Acknowledging that there is an issue and reaching out to seek help is a first step to getting better. So having said that, I must say that neither Gayatri or I in the session today want to commit to get into personal advice or a personal discussion on anybody's mental health issues. For the structure of the session like this doesn't allow for it. And second, I think some of these things are best discussed in one-on-one setup. We also do want to acknowledge at the same time and mention clearly that I do not do any diagnosis, nor do I do individual therapy sessions. Having said that, the role I have assumed for myself when I say mental health practitioner is if any of you thinks that they need help, we would be more than happy to help you find the right help or at least point you to the right help. There are many good starting points when you want to set yourself on the path to recovery. And we would be more than happy if we can hold a hand and get you on that path. So throughout this session, individually or later after this session, if you feel like reaching out to us, you're most welcome to do it. In the session today, as I said again, just reiterating that we may not have the space or we don't actually have the space to talk about individual issues. Having said that, let that not become a barrier to bring in any questions, comments that you have about the content that we'll be sharing today. As I jump into the discussion, I do also want to start with this one very important screen for a discussion like this, which I feel is extremely important. So I'm just going to go to my presentation, and just 1 second. There is, as always, a small technical issue with the presentation. Just 1 second. Okay, here we go. Also, just in terms of the structure or the flow of the session today, we will have one part in the start where we will be talking a little bit about the legal aspects of suicides and voluntary deaths in a broader context in India. We will be having about a 10 to 15 minutes pause after every module where we would love to hear comments and questions from you. As a simple instruction for a webinar like this, just raise your hands. We will notice that. We will try and accommodate as many comments and questions as possible. Having said that, if you do not get a chance, don't hesitate from putting out your questions and comments in the chat box. We'll be more than happy to read them. Towards the end of the session, we are keeping actually last 20-30 minutes just for an open discussion. So you're most welcome to also bring in some of your points and comments towards the end of the session. That's actually your platform, and we would love to hear from you. In fact, we both strongly believe that we can benefit from some of your experiences and comments as well. I have seen in the participant list that there are some doctors, there are some medical doctors, there are some public health practitioners from all as far as Assam. Your expertise and comments will be very, very useful for the session and for the rest of the participants as well. So experts in the field, do not hesitate to bring in your expertise. A session like Baithak actually is meant for conversations, hence the conversations are most welcome. So with this, let's jump in, and here we go. Gayatri, is the screen visible to you?
Yes, I can see it.
Okay. So for everyone, all the participants, we will be talking about suicides and death. We will have at most sensitivity while talking about some of the issues that we will be talking about today. Having said that, if any of you have feel suicidal now, or you find yourself in distress, or if you know somebody who's in distress, as Gayatri says, please reach out to them with kindness. And also, these are some of the numbers that are available to you to seek help. Do not hesitate to seek help. I do want to iterate what's written at the base of the screen is that no matter how much pain you are experiencing right now, you're not alone. You are supported, including in this group today that you are supported. Okay. So when we talk about suicides, one of the most important factor to sort of remember is that we have talked about suicides in we have a very different sort of reference point when we talk about suicides. Suicides related to mental health is something we have started talking about a lot more in India in the last few years. Prior to that, we have talked about suicides in the context of somebody else's suicide. We have talked about farmer suicides. We have heard about suicides, that's student suicide after examination or academic failure. We have talked about suicides in different contexts. We have also talked about voluntary death in India, especially in the legal context. Just as we start, let's try and see, is suicide is understood only in one particular way, or there are many ways to understand suicide and as a topic of voluntary death as well. So we are talking about at least three different types of voluntary deaths here. One is suicides, second is euthanasia, and the third is religious practices, which resemble or can some people might argue that those are forms of suicides. When we talk about all these three, in this first session, we are going to a section of this entire discussion. We'll be talking a little bit about how have we seen at some of these things legally, right? Also socially, how have we seen at some of these things? Earlier, we were at a point where even the external pressures or circumstances, such as, let's say, a case of domestic violence or a poor or impoverished household not having access to income, some of these were almost equated with mental health issues. These were considered as mental health issues. From there, we have moved to another now, end of the spectrum now, where we have started making a direct correlation between suicides and mental health. Gayatri will talk a lot more in details about it. Legally, we have actually seen different forms of suicides and voluntary deaths differently in India. Something around suicides, many of you might know that there is actually an Indian Penal Code section dedicated to suicides. Then we have some Supreme Court and High Court judgments about euthanasia. And about religious practices, we actually do have a couple of cases and some interesting discussion on that. So let's just look at some of the ways in which we see suicides and what's the spectrum that we are talking about, right? So on the one hand, we have suicide, which is what we understand that a person taking his or her life. On the other hand, we have involuntary euthanasia, what one may call in a very crude sense murder, that taking somebody else's life. So on one hand, we have taking one's own life. On the other hand, we have taking somebody else's life. Now, what is that in between that we see? That's voluntary euthanasia and non-voluntary euthanasia. So for those who are into medical practice, they might be familiar with these terms already. Those who are in the legal practice, they might be familiar with these terms already as well. As a layperson, how do we understand this, right? So suicide, as we said, us taking our own lives. What drives those suicides? What does something happen in your brain when you switch to suicide, and when you actually almost counterintuitively go for ending your life rather than saving your life? We know that as human beings, majority of our life is dedicated to living more and living safe. So we seek safety, we try to save our lives. So that's almost something that is assumed as the human nature. And suicide suddenly sounds like counterintuitive. One wants to seek death and escape, quote unquote, from life. What really happens, Gayatri will talk about it a little bit in the second session. Involuntary euthanasia, murder, I'm not going to talk too much about. Voluntary euthanasia and non-voluntary euthanasia are the two things which are legally something that we need to see. Because India has actually had a history of some judgments and some legal or cases around this. Within those also, there are two types, as you can see at the base: the active euthanasia and passive euthanasia. By active, you mean, again, it's a form of non-voluntary, because doctor administrating the patient is injecting a lethal injection to end somebody's life. And the passive one is actually disconnecting the support giving to a person, being given to the person who is in a state of, let's say, coma, or in a vegetative state, as some may say it. So these are the different sort of forms of euthanasia. The one in the center, the entire stream that you see in the center, is where majority of the legal cases are. And we will just see some of the landmark cases, and they have led to some specific stance the government has taken on the topic of suicides and voluntary death in India. So that's our next slide. So what are these different cases? So,
Ruhaan, before you continue, you have the ability to disable other people annotating, because there are people annotating and making those lines on the presentation.
Sorry, say again.
You have the option of disabling annotation. So if you go to that floating bar,
yes,
and look at options down there, it will say annotate, and you can actually disable annotation from other people.
Yeah. So is this good?
Yes. And then you can, of course, remove the annotations from everybody where people have.
Is this good, Yada?
Yeah, this is good.
Okay, excellent. I also see some marks on the screen. Anyway, so just remember the first slide in which we did talk about voluntary deaths more than suicides. We talked about religious practices which were perceived as suicides. And let's just look at how have we seen at this entire topic of voluntary deaths and suicides legally, right? So we have a famous case of Aruna Shanbag, a nurse who was raped and not murdered, of course, raped in a hospital in Bombay. And she remained in a vegetative state for good 42 years before it was decided that it is okay to take away her life support, which is essentially passive euthanasia. That a patient is not in a place to decide about her life, This actually was as an outcome of a Supreme Court judgment. Until then, passive euthanasia was not allowed in India. We also did have cases prior to that, but Aruna Shanbag's case essentially led to that landmark judgment, and now we do have passive euthanasia legal in India. The same judgment also did talk about living will, which is a person writing before sort of dying their sort of will to die in a particular manner, which is passive euthanasia again. Once again, if they are in a state where they are not able to decide about their life, then the doctor or the caregiver, and I'm not going into the details of the judgment, parents, caregivers, and doctors are in a place to make that decision, which of taking away the life support. That's essentially the crux of the entire judgment. The second part is the Salekhana Vrat. I'm referring here, of course, to the particular sect within Jainism, the Shwetambar Jains, which have this practice, Salekhana or Santhara Vrat, as we know, where you essentially die or choose to die gradually by cutting your access to food and water. Uh, while even talking about this as a tradition in Jainism, I must say that this is something, and it came up even in the judgment, that it is not something which is widely practiced across Jainism, right? So there is obviously no specific religious reference we want to make here, but this is the case that came up in the Rajasthan High Court in 2015, where the High Court actually expressed, in fact, observed that even if it was a religious practice and it was a Santhara Vrat, it was a form of suicide. Of course, Supreme Court held that decision and, in fact, ruled that this is not a case of suicide. So that's an interesting and open debate that is going on. That is not something that is still concluded. But these are some couple of very important judgments, and if somebody is interested, the timeline of these judgments are very much available on the internet. We can look up for those. Now there is another interesting case, which is a case for active euthanasia. Now, by active euthanasia, what do we mean? Is essentially asking for a right to die, right? So there is this interesting couple, Iravati and Narayan Lavate from Dadar, Mumbai, who actually wrote, who have filed a public interest litigation in Supreme Court, as well as have consistently written to the President of India asking for a right to die. So Mr. Lavate is 86-year-old, Miss Iravati is 76-year-old, and their point is actually saying that we have lived our lives and we have lived fairly content lives. In our old age, we don't want to live without one another. So we don't want to be in a situation that one of us dies and goes ahead and the other one remains. Also, they have said that our kids are far away. Hence, we want to sort of not be in a place where we want to take our own sort of we don't want to be in a place where we keep taking care of ourselves, so they want to essentially have a right to die. Their petition is declined. India has not taken stance at the moment. Active euthanasia, which is right to die, does not exist in India. Now again, in this, Supreme Court actually has made some very interesting point. The Article 21, which talks about right to life, can also be perceived as right to die. And people who come with strong belief in individual liberty or a liberal view on what right to live and right to die could look like can have opinions on this in across actually multiple countries, including in India. A movement for right to death does exist, and people have claimed that a person should have a right to dignified death. And who makes a decision about this? These are some of the discussions that are still open. Interestingly, we do have also Mental Health Act, which came up in 2017. So suicides, active euthanasia, all of these are until a very recent time actually were punishable offences under Indian Penal Code 309. I personally found it extremely ironical that if your attempt to suicide fails, you are punished by law. If your attempt succeeds, your life is gone. So it's a punishment anyway to the person, rather than digging deep into the sort of circumstances or situations leading that person to seek death and addressing those adequately, whether those are medical issues, social issues, we'll continue talking about it. We had penalized it in the Indian Penal Code. India, of course, is not alone to have rules like this. There were multiple countries, and there are multiple countries who actually do still have suicide as a punishable attempt to suicide as a punishable offense. Suicide is not a punishable offense, of course, as I said. The Mental Health Act 2017, which is an outcome of Mental Health Bill, which was 2016 bill, passed in both the houses, and now it's enacted. Some of us know about it, some of us don't know about it. It hasn't essentially repealed IPC 309. Some people interpret it as that repeal of 309. 309 IPC is not repealed. So attempt to suicide is still considered as a punishable offense in India. Having said that, the Mental Health Act 2017 changed it a little bit by saying that if somebody attempts suicide, assume that the person is under severe stress and requires help, and it is government's responsibility to provide relief, health and rehabilitation to the person who is opting to die by suicide. This is something Gayatri and I also do still believe, and people who are into this practice would understand that commit suicide is not exactly the right phrase to use. So actually die by suicide is the phrase we will be using quite often, because the language is formed around it. And Gayatri, I would encourage you to talk a little bit about this, why it is important to say to let's say die by suicide rather than committing suicide. Having said that, in this session we will sort of be sure about using the term right. So coming back to the Mental Health Act 2017, it hasn't repealed 309. It has essentially just said that do not sort of just assume that the person who's opting for dying by suicide needs help, and the help should be provided. There are many factors that are there, and particularly the mental health aspect of suicides is something that is covered comprehensively in this act. And in fact, we do consider it, I personally consider this act as a very good step forward in terms of building more awareness about mental health, creating more space for dialogues around it, and most importantly, creating solutions and help for people from all strata of society whenever there is a mental health issue. So the act is certainly a forward-looking one. There are limitations in terms of implementation. Gayatri and I keep talking about it. In fact, just this morning we had a conversation about the topic that some of the other acts that exist contradict the provisions of Mental Health Act. And another thing is, like many other policies, many other acts, the text of the act is fantastic. It at many points gives you goosebumps, makes you feel great that, okay, our policymakers are talking about it. But there is very little action orientation to it. And in the third part of the session, we'll talk a little bit about it. But it's very important for an act like this to have that innate action orientation. How are we going to provide that help to a country as vast as India and the population that we have? There are various studies which actually say that there is about 40 to 50% of Indian population which has a biological disposition to mental health condition. In this, not an issue, it's an issue of the country. And in that context, this almost has the responsibility that it does not stop at just giving the provisions, but comes out with a call, sort of plan for action. Currently, that doesn't exist. Having said that, taking away this burden and at least building a little more of discourse around some of the suicides or many of the suicides could be an outcome of an active, unaddressed mental health condition is an important step. So this is essentially the overall sort of legal or policy world that looks like around voluntary deaths and suicides. Active euthanasia is still illegal in India. It is not allowed. It is something, even if it's an Article 21 provision, right to life, and in that context, then perhaps also right to death. It is a topic on which it's difficult to have a consensus. One of the ways to look at this is when the suicide is decriminalized or IPC is repealed, which is not repealed, IPC 309, having the right to die actually exists with you. As such, as I said, to choose to die, anyway, you're not punished. You're punishing yourself in that context, if I may say so. And if the attempt doesn't succeed, something like a mental health act might come to your help. At least that's available there. Now we are talking about mental health being included also in insurance. So seeking help should become affordable and more accessible for more people. Having said that, at this point, it is difficult to reach at a consensus on whether right to die should be there in the country or no. And what does that mean? That person choosing to take their life should have means to do it. Now, why can't we do it in a country like India? So one part of the argument, without taking any personal stance on it, One part of the argument that that right should be there, and dignified death is a person's right as much as dignified life is. So if we understand dignified life well, and we have the whole right-based movements around it, and all of us talk about it in different contexts, then why is it so difficult and controversial to talk about right to death? The stance that some of the courts have taken, and it's only been talked in the courtroom so far, is that by actually legitimizing it, we do not want to set sort of basically legitimize the right to die, essentially. And India is not alone in this, right? If you look at globally what the discourse on this, it remains consistently in favor of life. Now, one question that I have for all of you, and we can take it up in the discussion that follows, is, and doctors who are in the participants and the room can also have an interesting perspective on it. So I really welcome all of them to contribute to this. That in a physical health setup, when you have an illness, you have a physical condition, you go to the doctor, and there is almost a tacit agreement between the doctor and the patient that patient wants to get better, and doctor is going to help the patient to get better. In case of mental health conditions, sometimes that is not clear, particularly when it comes to some of the mental health conditions, such as personality disorders, the area where I focus a lot, and that's where my therapeutic interest also lies. That in case of personality disorders, despite having excellent prognosis, and people with personality disorders do and can get better, so I do want to emphasize this. But when the prognosis and the process of recovery is long, it's not linear, it can have several ups and downs, and add to that, the life doesn't stop. So you have to continue living while you have the condition. And living in a society where mental health is not something that we talk about, while there is some awareness now, we don't know what exactly how to support others and support oneself. The question can come to somebody's mind that why am I not better off just taking my life? And then, is that right with the patient, or is it the caregiver? As a caregiver, as a therapist, what do I sort of where do I put my vote? So these are some of the interesting questions that are there, particularly when it comes to mental health and those mental health conditions leading to deaths or suicides. It would be interesting to hear from all of you. What do you feel about it? Uh, as just sort of just stop this part of the discussion, I want to just conclude with a couple of points that, as far as suicides are concerned, we have come a long way in acknowledging that there could be an active component of a mental health condition. And to that extent, the provisions or the acts such as Mental Health Act 2017 can certainly go a long way. Having said that, we haven't yet understood the complexity and diversity of the topic of suicides. While we can explain some suicides, and we do tend to sometimes look immediately into the external stressors that led to the suicide. And one of the important examples being of course, Sushant Singh Rajput, the actor, that so much of media coverage, so much of public opinion has gone into identifying what were the immediate stressors, almost sort of like trying to arrive at a conclusion that this was a reason, this was a reason. In some cases, it might be obvious. In many of the cases, it is not obvious. So we have to acknowledge that suicides are not linear either, as the life is not. It is complicated, and the topic of suicides is also extremely complicated. We can explain some suicides, we cannot explain some suicides. We cannot dig deeper into the reason. Does that mean that we just give up on suicides completely? Absolutely not. The first important point is to start talking about suicides a lot more. This is something that we have considered. In fact, even while proposing this session, my question was on a Friday evening, does everybody want to talk about this topic, which is morbid? It is not. The number of people who are opting to death, particularly in the current situation of pandemic, almost every day we are hearing about people taking their lives. It is extremely important to start talking about it. So talk about it from the legal point of view. What is the legal framework that we require? What are the policy measures that we require? Talk about it from the health point of view. What can we do? What do we need to do better? Do we have enough therapists? Do we have enough skilled therapists in the country who can at least provide the primary help to people? Then what are the conditions that we can solve for? What are the conditions we cannot solve for? Are there any medical or are there any social issues that we need to tackle the issue of suicides comprehensively, right? So these are many open questions that we have. It's important, as I said again, that the dialogue needs to start. And keeping with that spirit, I want to open the room a little bit for comments, questions, and opinions from some of you. As you know, we have more than, I think, close to 100 participants. So obviously, we can't take all the comments. But if some of you start raising your hands, I can quickly just let a couple of you unmute a couple of you and get you to speak. Others who want to just express their views can do it in the chat box. Are there any hands up? Any quick questions, comments from anyone? So I'm going to just read out a couple of comments that have come out in the chat box. Mr. H.K. Das from Assam says that thank you for the presentation. In fact, a person seeking help from a physician, general practitioner, he or she may not divulge his mental health problems in one setting. Multiple counseling sessions are required, and if any, medications, antipsychotic, are required. Psychiatrist help is also required. Absolutely right, Mr. Das. Absolutely right. We completely agree with you that people do not always talk about mental health conditions. Also, sometimes having that awareness upfront is difficult. In fact, we often say that essentially person who has an active mental health condition also expecting that the person will be able to articulate for herself or himself that she has a condition is actually putting additional burden. So it's also up to us to understand what are the indications of mental health conditions and sometimes suggest that person seeking help. Having said that, I completely agree with you that general practitioners could also have an important role to play in terms of guiding people to the right support. It could be psychiatrist, it could be a psychologist, depends entirely on the condition of an individual person. It cannot be one particular starting point for all. And Gayatri will talk a little bit more about this, in fact, a lot more about this in the next part as well. I'm going to just still quickly read a few more comments that have come in. Seep Gupta says, "You think Mental Health Act requires change?" Well, I mean, there is interesting discussion going on about the Mental Health Act. My personal view on that is it is certainly pathbreaking to an extent that in a country like India, it almost comes across as a forward-looking act. Quite often, our policy tends to be reactive, that we react to the problem, whereas this one seems to be an act which is forward looking, which is anticipating certain situations and already providing for it, including this IPC 309, taking a stance on it. So some of these are very good things about the act. Having said that, action orientation is important and the act doesn't have it. And action orientation includes, and again we will talk a little bit about in the second part of the session, but what is action orientation, right? Okay, if 40% of our population has disposition to mental health conditions, and there could be different views on this, one research says it, then what is the number of therapists that are available in the country today? Second, if you look at doctors, we have doctors of all different fees ranges, right? From starting from free practitioners to people who charge several thousand rupees per consultation. When it comes to mental health support, right from psychologists, psychiatrists, etc., at the risk of sort of sound generalizing, I might say that they're extremely expensive. For a lot of people, that help, despite being there, is not actually available because of the affordability. And an act like this needs to acknowledge these situations upfront and have some action orientation. So that's the change that I can certainly talk about. Uh, Komal Yadav has said that I don't know why, but I feel alone. Komal, as I said at the start of the session, I would strongly encourage that talk about it. And if you do feel that you need help, don't wait. Just reach out to the numbers. In fact, we will be sharing one complete Excel sheet of therapists from all over the country. Gayatri, actually, is it possible for you to just put that link right away?
Yeah, I'll do it.
Yeah. And you are most welcome to seek that help, Komal. I'm not assuming that there is already, first, don't assume that there is a condition, but if you do feel alone, you need to talk about it. More and more you think about your being alone yourself, you're perpetuating that thought. So do talk about it. And I really, really hope that it helps you. After this session, we will be sharing our email addresses and social media handles. Feel free to reach out. We will be more than happy if you need to seek help. We are more than happy to point you to the right help. Isn't suicide a protest against any kind of institution? Interesting. There is one way of looking at it, and we will talk about it a lot in the second part of the session. I see Gayatri smiling simply because it is like, yes, this is exactly what I want to talk about. So that's how I understand it. Can someone share her personal issue for seeking help? Absolutely. Absolutely, Saptaparni. In fact, the whole point of seeking help is to share your personal issues. So absolutely go ahead for this. Said Saad says, "Hi sir, I'm a clinical psychology student. Suicides in our field of studies somehow defines the unapproachable attitude of a criminal psychologist. Does this stand true?" I really don't have a view on this. Gayatri, do you have anything to quickly say? I'm not actually very clear about the question, but do you have anything to say?
I didn't understand the question because there was.
So maybe Said Saad, we will write to you in person. At the moment, we are not very clear about the question.
Maybe he or she, I'm sorry, they can just sit through the second part of
Yeah.
the Baitak.
Oh.
And eventually, if the question's not solved, I'm more than happy to attack it again.
Without a saying that. So Gautam Iyer says that having close friends and constant support from family is needed. No doubt about it. Having said that, quite often we also do tend to oversimplify suicides by saying that talk to me, or you should have talked to me, or she should have talked to me and she would feel better. It is extremely self-righteous to believe that you are able to help in every single condition. So that is not adequate. Having said that, providing that support, encouraging people to talk, being non-judgmental when people express their suicidal thoughts is extremely important, and we are completely with you on that. Vaibhav Shukla says that usually healthcare facilities for mental health not available in government hospitals. Absolutely true. Not available even in private hospitals for that matter. Very few private hospitals actually have a developed, well-functioning psychiatric ward. Ranjit Kumar Roshan says, sir, why suicides come in mind? How to deviate such a mind? Deviate is perhaps not the right word, but I'm not going to go into that a lot more. Gayatri will be talking a lot about why suicides come in mind, what is the mental makeup when a person feels suicidal. Ashok Sankaran says that not only physician, we had once a system of family doctor. He was very easy to talk to. That is missing today because everyone seeks super specialty doctors. I don't actually have a view on that. Having said that, the family doctor himself or herself, we have also had the history of completely underestimating the mental health issues or completely putting the burden of recovery on the person who's facing mental health issues. So we need to keep that in mind as well. Having said that, yes, absolutely. A family doctor who knows your health history comprehensively is extremely important. B. Anand, I think it's Bhuvna Anand, says precaution is better than cure. We must not isolate anybody and spread universal brotherhood. Yes. How do we help friends who are suicidal? Also, many times they aren't willing to take professional help. In case of mental health issues, if there is one link to that particular suicidal ideation, my point is always that somehow seeking help and recovery does and ultimately lie in the hand of a person who's facing issues. Having said that, supporting them and continue to encourage them to seek help is also extremely important. How do we actually support? We can talk about it a little bit as the session goes forward. Now there are 26 more messages. It will be difficult to read out all of them. We will try, and as Gayatri starts her discussion, I'm going to read through some of these comments. In the last part of the session, we will be able to summarize some of these and have another discussion again. But this is really, really good that people are talking about it. Over to Gayatri. We stopped at the Mental Health Act 2017 and what the provisions there are. There are already many questions about what leads to people choosing suicide. What is the mental makeup, so to say, of the person who's opting for suicide? Is it just a medical issue or just a social issue? Gayatri has some wonderful insights on that. So I'm welcoming Gayatri and putting myself on mute now as I go and read the comments from people. Welcome, Gayatri.
Thank you so much, Ruhaan. And thank you for inviting me. I have some butterflies in my stomach, but just this overwhelming response that all of you have shown is quite encouraging. So, Ruhaan, can you please share the slides, the next one? Just to link up the comments or the questions that were coming in. Why does someone feel suicidal? Is it a mental thing? Is it a biological thing, etc., etc.? I can talk about neurological changes, but that is not what I want to do. Nevertheless, I will just run you through what actually happens at the brain level. The earlier one, yeah, thanks. So studies have suggested that there are neurological changes in the brain of a suicide victim, and these differ, from those who have not attempted. So there are, like, of course, there are more studies coming in, but abnormal distribution of a neurotransmitter called GABA, that's gamma aminobutyric acid, has been noticed. There is also cerebrospinal fluid in our brain and our spine, which also has shown to be increased in autopsies of individuals who have died by suicide. And obviously low levels of serotonin, which is also a sign of depression, clinical depression, is something that happens at the brain level in a person who's probably contemplating to take his own life. Having said that, having spoken about the chemical locha, it's not just enough. All this, whether it is going to happen or not, a lot of it is determined by other factors. Ruhaan, can you just go on the next slide, please? So, of course, you have genetic and biological factors, but you also have personality factors. So personality is basically your relatively stable traits, like, I am someone who likes to hang out with people, or I'm not someone who does not like to hang out with people, or I'm usually very nervous about certain things. So these are your tendencies, and they differ from individual to individual. Psychological constructs such as self-esteem, what do I think about myself, or self-confidence. For example, I think I'm a very bad student at math, and I don't think I can change that esteem about myself. So, I have a negative self-esteem about my performance in mathematics, and I have a low self-confidence, which tells me that I can't do anything about it. Lack of motivation. These are all psychological constructs that I can give you examples of. But the most important thing is there have to be events. Like, we all live in a society. We live this environment around us, and our social reality is not perceived, but it's constructed according to our life events, according to whether we've had distress earlier on or right now. If you were to just look at yourself, where you were in January when there was no corona happening and no quarantine and lockdown 1 to lockdown, I don't know, like an iPhone, every time it's like, changing the number. We have changed because the circumstances around us have changed, and all animals, like, when they are put up with a challenge, they try their best to adapt to the situation. So what exactly triggers a person to take his or her own life, we don't know. There is no one reason behind. We can pull out so many cases of suicide and be like, oh, this person died of suicide because of this one reason. I don't think anybody can just pinpoint and say that this was the only reason why they chose to take their life. What I want to bring to your attention, everybody's attention, keeping in mind the audience that we were going to have this evening, are the two models of disability. And now you'll be like, why are you talking about disability? Aren't we talking about mental illnesses? Aren't we talking about suicide? But a mental illness, and I'm not just talking as someone who has studied psychology, but as someone who's lived with a mental illness, who struggles with a mental illness from time to time, it goes beyond the medical model of disability. Ruhaan, can you please go to the next one? I do have impairment at times when it comes to taking decisions about my work, about whether I should get up and brush my teeth. I mean, I've been at that point. I'm not at that point today. And that decision-making capacity has evolved, has changed thanks to medication, thanks to therapy, thanks to family support, change in environment, a lot of things, exercise regime, healthy food, everything has contributed. But I just want to bring your attention to what the medical model is. It only talks about individual and his impairment. No, you need to go back. I think you need to go back. No, little more. Yes, thank you. So individual and his impairment is the problem. So you see that, let's call her Sarah. Sarah is in a wheelchair, and all her friends have decided to go to Goa, to the beach for the weekend. And she wishes to go along with them, but she cannot because she's in a wheelchair. So the medical model basically talks about the individual, focuses on the individual and his or her impairments. So maybe if we invite Sarah to a function, a family function, she'll be like, yeah, but I'm on a wheelchair. I cannot, because there'll be staircases and yay and wo. So that is the medical model. The other model is what we call as the social model of disability. Now, the social model of disability basically talks about the barriers between an individual's impairment and those barriers which make him disabled. So in Europe, in the US, I have seen that there are ramps for people on a wheelchair to go dip themselves in the sea. So it's like telling Sarah, but no, there is a ramp. So we know we're all going to push you, push your wheelchair. You're going to take a dip along with all of us. And that barrier is going to go away. And you get to have fun with us, and you're going to be included in the society, become a part of it, etc. I am going to mute people. Yeah, so I was, another example that I had on my mind was asking a visually impaired person, have you read this particular, like, do you know about this particular book? If that book is not available in Braille, that becomes the point of focus, that we need to provide more literature in Braille, probably. We need to have our footpaths should be more disabled friendly and focus on accessibility issues. And this is the same, it is very similar to what happens in a mental illness. Of course, when I talk about accessibility, you don't need to make too much of infrastructural changes, or maybe you need to make, depending on the mental illness, you need to make certain infrastructural changes. But the major barrier that is seen when we talk about mental illnesses is stigma. Stigma is something that absolutely affects your recovery more than anything else. So what is stigma? It's basically a mark that denotes, something is shameful about you. You're not wearing a bindi. You're not wearing formals, or you're not well dressed, or you're looking different, or you're a guy and you're wearing kajal. I'm just giving you examples of, trying to shame someone else. Or it can also be about yourself, where you perceive yourself as, you internalize these comments, these opinions, and you go like, yeah, maybe I'm not worth it. Yeah, maybe I should not be doing this. I don't feel good about it. Which is then, transformed into shame and guilt. I hope I'm not talking too fast, because I have a tendency to speak too fast, Ruhaan. I'm not talking too fast. I can see you. Okay, you're smiling. Okay. All right.
The clicks, sometimes I'm also, there are many comments which are coming in. So I'm also trying to keep up with the chat. Okay. So please ignore my random clicks. That's...
Okay, all right. So there is, of course, like I was saying, there's social stigma, but there's also self-stigma. So social stigma is what log kya kahenge kind of a stigma, and perceived stigma, self-stigma is, I'm no good. Like, why did I do this? Why did I wear this? Where you start focusing, or you put the onus of your behavior on yourself. Let's break it down. Okay. So we are all, like I said, are social reality is not perceived as it is. Like you may see this as yellow, but someone will say this is mustard. Someone will say it is something else. Similarly to events, people will respond differently according to the experiences that they've had, the education that everything, all the environmental factors, all the genetic factors. So they come with a package and their social reality is constructed. So if I were to fight with my grandmother about menstruation, for example, which is supposed to be a taboo, her social reality is constructed through her past, the way she has lived her life, the kind of events that have happened with her, etc., etc. If I were to discuss menstruation with a millennial or a Gen Z person, they are all over Insta and talking about it like very openly, where I get to question, okay, maybe I need to push myself, I need to shatter more, whatever, like, fear that I have, anxieties that I have. So we all have our biases. And they sort of crystallize into stereotypes, which are basically beliefs. So they're at a cognitive level. So I think all Muslims are terrorists. Okay, just every day, open the newspaper, and this is a stereotype that any coronavirus news printed in like on Twitter, you only have Muslim faces on it, and I'm like what? No one else gets it, or what? So these are stereotypes. Okay, they're beliefs that you have about a certain person, certain community, an event, etc., etc. Then you have prejudices, where you have feelings of disgust, of fear. My God, black people, I'm afraid. I don't want to go to that area because it only has black people. Or, oh, only Chinese people live there. No, let's not go there because super spreaders or whatever it is. So these are negative feelings, affects that, or attitudes that you have for a person. Or like, someone's going through depression. Yeah, don't call that person, just so much of like, burden and party pooper and whatever, like, I've heard these things so many times. And then there's actual behavior that happens, which is discrimination, where you see in workplaces, for example, men are usually paid more than women. This is something that actually is practiced. I know so many people in the film industry where a hero, a mainstream actor, is paid more than a heroine. And I'm like, no, but she did a better job. Yet, no, it is something that is manifested. So it's a behavior. So we're looking at it at a cognitive level, at a thought level, at an affective level, which is an emotional level, where you feel shame about someone, you feel fear about someone, disgust about someone. And then you have the actual behavior of making a person sit aside, or making them sit on the floor, or giving them a different thali to eat from, etc., etc. Now, why am I talking about this, where you've not mentioned suicides, you've not mentioned mental illnesses in like the last 10 minutes? It is because it's very important to understand how these things function. Stigma is one of the biggest barriers in recovery. As much as, yes, okay, I can say that mental illness, I don't know how I got clinical depression, or I don't know how my aunt got schizophrenia. I don't know what triggered schizophrenia in my aunt, but I know that the onus of recovery is on everybody around her, on her immediate environment and her distant environment also. And when it comes to that, when it comes to recovery, stigma becomes the biggest barrier to overcome. Can you please go to the next slide?
Yes. Gayatri,
Yes.
may just quickly in the chat, Manvi Arora wants you to talk a little bit more about difference between disability and impairment.
Okay. Can I go back to it later, Manvi?
You can. Yeah, that's what I just told her, that you will get back to her that a little. You can. Presentation, just want to flag it off. And Gaurav also wants you to talk a little about what is clinical depression. So if you can also talk a little bit about it after your presentation is over. Sorry to break your flow, just flagging off.
No, it's not a problem at all.
Yeah.
Right. So it is extremely important to demystify suicides and mental illnesses. As someone who has lived with depression, yes, for again, like Gaurav might get a little bit of insight. I will come to the symptoms of depression later, but as a lived experience, it is not always staring into the void, or having a knot, or continuously feeling lonely. I cannot pinpoint, like, yes, there were certain events, certain moments where I felt like I am on a slippery slope, I need to seek help, I need to do at least one thing. So when I was living in France, that one thing that I used to do is buy milk. So I never bought, you can, in Europe, you can buy milk in bulk. And everybody does that. So they buy like cartons, 10 cartons of milk. And I saw to it that, no, I'm just going to buy one carton, because that was a reason enough for me to just step out and go to the nearest supermarket, and just, I'm like, I did it. Like, that was my challenge. And if I say that that was my challenge to just go and buy milk, people will laugh. They'll be like, but that was my disability. At that point, I was impaired emotionally to just, like, expose myself to a lot of triggers around, like taking the bus, or just hanging out with friends, cooking dinners, nothing. It all stopped. And that one thing that I used to do is, acha, I need to work on my bare minimum, which is going and buying milk. Okay, that is my go-to kind of a thing. So coming back to how do we go about demystifying suicides, this is something that Net Shrink, Dr. Soumitra Pathare, talks about. I think you should all follow him. I'm like being a hype beast for him on Twitter, where there are certain things that we say become barriers. Okay, like, if you talk about suicides, maybe it'll just trigger someone. No, don't talk about it. Don't talk about it. I mean, my response to that is, even if we don't talk about menstruation, people are going to menstruate. So I don't see the point in not talking about it. In fact, talking about it just creates more awareness. And I know that someone else is using pads, someone else is using menstrual cup, and some other, like my nanny used to do this back in her day. So that is the only way you can prevent from things going worse. So you need to talk openly about it. If a person has said that they have suicidal ideation, it's not like, no, I'm going to, like, mandir yahi banega types. It's not like that. People are very ambivalent about dying today. They feel like sometimes, and it comes very, like, there are warning signs, but there are very subtle warning signs also. So I know that after watching Blade Runner 2020, there was a subtle joke that was cracked, saying that, oh, but Blade Runner can be something else, right? So I'm talking very honestly, but that was something that was said in a group of friends, and for us, that was something to look out for. I was like, that is an association that was made out of nowhere. It was in a very funny situation. Of course, we didn't jump and bounce and like, no, talk why you said this, why you said that, like some agony aunt. We didn't go and dig, but we did send a quick WhatsApp later saying that, what's up? Like, if you want to just talk about it, we can just go get a drink or like whatever. So people who actually talk about suicide might be those who are reaching out for help or support. So don't shun them away. People who talk about mental illnesses, people who talk about depressions. I just had a friend this afternoon on a WhatsApp group saying that the more I try and talk about my depression with my family members and my relatives, the more I feel they don't understand. Please note that talking about your experiences is an essential part of recovery. Is the day I accepted and the day I started talking about it openly, I think my recovery speed just, went up. This is from my own experience, and this is what research studies also say. And that's why there are so many support groups, for example, because you understand that there are other people who have had the same experience, similar experience. At the same time, you understand that, it can also manifest differently, the same thing, according to the context. So people who talk about suicide may be reaching out for help or support. Like I said, suicidal thoughts are not permanent. One day you feel like choking on a cherry tomato, and the next day you're like, I want to go get, I don't know, a chicken bucket at KFC or whatever it is. So it's not permanent. It is something that just anything can trigger it. It can be loneliness. And loneliness has got nothing to do with you living in isolation, you living like, people live by themselves, youngsters live by themselves. It's not. You can be lonely in a group of people also. And this is very, very important. So people with mental illnesses are not necessarily suicidal. So, and I think if you go around asking, if people were to talk about those who are actually diagnosed by psychiatrists, clinical psychologists, they have never had the idea or the wish to end their lives. So also those who die of suicide are not necessarily those who've had a mental illness. So having these, I don't know, clickbait articles that Sushant Singh Rajput might be bipolar or might have depression, it serves nobody. It gives, like what? Like, no, I know so many people who are living with, Kanye West apparently is living with bipolar disorder, or he may not be, but you cannot, yes, mental illness and suicide, there has been a correlation, but that is not it. That is not the whole picture. You're not looking at the whole picture here. Can you please go on to the next slide so that we can give the whole picture? So let's start looking at both suicides and mental health from a public health perspective. Okay, in order to address mental health issue across the population, you need to dig deeper. Okay, so I can talk to you about symptoms of depression from the DSM-5, or symptoms of schizophrenia or personality disorders, like Ruhaan said a while ago. We can talk about these things. We can talk about pathologization, how it becomes problematic, etc., etc., etc. But that is just the surface of it. Okay, what is it that amplifies this in people? And it is everything, all the discriminatory behaviors, stereotypes, and prejudices that you have been exposed to. Injustice, the trauma, it can be childhood trauma, racism, transphobia, which is like one of the biggest barriers when it comes to healthcare, inequality, poverty. If I were to get like touch wood, but if I were to get cancer, I would rather want to be in Europe than be here, because I do have social security in Europe. So all my medical expenses will be, so there is a safety net for me here. Like I have to, like, I know so many people who are detected of or diagnosed of COVID, and their first question is, my God, how much does an ICU bed cost? Which is unfair. I just feel that it's unfair. I mean, you've already got a virus in you, and now you have to fight something else that you ideally should not be fighting. And these are factors that we really, really, really need to focus on if you want to recover. If the focus, like, I'm all for doing face packs and getting nails done and hair colored. And yes, medication is, I've had the best psychiatrists, and they've said that no, just follow this course of medication, stick on it. This is your life jacket. We are going to go into therapy. Therapy is going to teach you how to swim across, but you have to swim. Okay, you have to swim across. I'm just going to give you the life jacket. I'm going to seize it to your size. There's going to be a therapist who's going to teach you how to swim the most efficiently across the sea, and rest is up to you. Okay, and I believe in all these things. But having said that, this has access only to a limited section of the society. I need to have at least 2,000 rupees in my purse to go get my hair colored, okay, and feel good about it for a day. I can go for a long run at the end of a very long day or early in the morning, but still have to live with an abusive partner. And that does not solve, that 5-kilometer run does not solve my problem. So we need to dig deeper, and the spade has to be of social justice. And this is where you all come in, because there are two very important words, social and justice. So we need the legal aspect of it, and we need the societal aspect of it to work on this together. Can you go to the next slide, please?
Yes. Also, Gayatri, just a time check.
Yeah, I'm going to be done in next 5 minutes. So these are just some examples that I found on the internet. There was a student, Anjana Harish, I think her name was, from Kerala. from the LGBTQ community who was suggested conversion therapy and who died by suicide. There are so many incidences of domestic violence that happen, and of course, housewives have opted for suicide. Very recently, I'm sure you've all seen this image on Twitter where this Dalit couple who were also farmers, they were farming on in Guna in Madhya Pradesh, and they consumed pesticide in front of the officers that came to whatever ask them to vacate the land. Medical students, youth, like in school, board exams, get 98%, get 95%. Yeah, but my teacher is not good. Like all my life, and this is again a lived experience that I'm sharing. All my life, I cursed myself for getting the lowest marks in history. And now that I see my history teacher on social media, I'm like, okay, I was not the reason. The reason was something else. It is the system that kind of was the burden for me. And this is after like a year of therapy. There's this TikTok star that was spoken about. Her suicide was spoken about widely on Twitter. The lockdown, this draconian lockdown that just happened one fine day, 5th of April, say, like, I think, thali bajao, and then that's it. It's over. Wherever you are, stay there. The last 2 months, I've had the opportunity to work with migrants on the field, thanks to some friends who are doing exceptional work in sending them home, listening to their issues, and they have nowhere to go. They had their Aadhaar card numbers written on their palms and a phone number of their nearest, like their peer or their family member written, and they never washed their hands. This is where we are at, okay? Even if I speak to them about mental health and awareness, their basic necessities are not met, of getting water, tap water, pen and paper to write 2 times, food, something on the head, a shelter, access to healthcare services. If I were to get symptoms of corona, I don't know, homeless people, where do they go? Where do they go to get themselves injected? Is it still 4,000 rupees per test for them? Is it 2,500 rupees test for them? Or is it free for them? I don't know. I'm asking these questions, and it's obviously different for different states, different districts. But these are essential questions that we need to ask. Finally, can you go to the next one, please? It's very, very important to change the public discourse on suicides and mental health, because that is something that is going to save lives. Okay, media reporting of suicide, like, you don't have to show a rope or, like, a hanging thing if someone has died by suicide. You don't need to. Okay, I can understand in case of celebrities like Robin Williams, Sushant Singh Rajput, you need to know they have a big fan following, they're public figures, etc., etc. But you don't need to divulge the means of suicide. You can take away access. Pesticides are found very easily. Alcohol is used. Drugs are used, like, over dosage. The other thing that you can do is, this is something that the WHO proposes, because when we look at mental health, there are 2 things. There's awareness, that we need to talk more. We need to make people more aware of what mental illness, what mental health is. But there is also accessibility. Like someone asked a question as to, yeah, but in rural areas, are there mental health hospitals? In government hospitals, there are no psychiatric wards, for example. So we need to start bridging that gap, that accessibility gap. And it can be achieved by training community healthcare workers. These are the gatekeepers. An ASHA worker in a small village, she knows who's going to deliver when, or she knows like who has what problem. They are people who know, and we need to build it from grassroots level upwards, while implementing the policies that, that is how, like, we'll have to get both the ends together for it to be more efficient. And of course, there are other things to look at. Like, you can have school-based interventions, we can have workplace interventions, we can have interventions to curb domestic violence. There need to be financial safety nets, because I need to know that if I get sick, I'm going to be taken care of, like my expenses, my could be taken care of by someone. If I were to tell you the expenses incurred by me on my mental illness, they are exorbitant. And I have had the privilege of working, earning money, saving, friends' help to pay those bills. But I really don't know if our domestic help who comes in shows signs of depression, if she's going to get the same facilities where she gets to pay 2,000 rupees to a psychiatrist and then probably 1,500 rupees to these are the minimum rates that I'm telling you, to a clinical psychologist for therapy. So there have to be financial safety nets. And finally, the last thing, and then I'll hand it over to you again, Ruhaan, is this shift in thinking. Because and I can give you a very good example for teenagers. Like, it's like, don't smoke or use condoms, but how to? Okay, can you go to the next slide, because I think the content is on the next slide. Thank you. So just giving information is not enough. How to bring about that, how to implement, which Ruhaan was also talking about, the action, the focus on action orientation, implementation is very, very important. If I were to tell you that, do this, do that, no, but how do I go about, take medication, but how do I go about making that a habit of taking medication? So it's very, very important to understand that people interpret and make meaning of information based on their own context, culture, norms, network influence, people's behaviors. You can't always control the issues, that create your behavior. I can't have control at my workplace, which is extremely sexist, for example, which triggers I don't know, anxiety and low self-esteem. And then, that whole rabbit hole, I'm going down, down, down. And I come home, there is again an altercation with a family member. The next day, I'm not getting rickshaw, whatever. So, everything just, and then my brain just says that I can't do this anymore. Okay. So, we need to understand that we don't always have control over issues, but we can voice. Okay. We can voice. We have a voice, and we can. This is very, very important to speak up. Like that spade of social justice has to be held by everyone. Like everybody has to dig deeper with that spade of social justice. And finally, it's very important to understand that suicide is not a rational decision. Nobody wants to actually end their life. It is a cry for help. It is a desperate cry for help. So it's an emotional decision where everything else has failed. The face packs, the medication, the therapy, this activism, ye wo falana dimka, and the individual feels like nothing is working for me. So it's not a rational decision, but an emotional one. And I will end with that thought, I think. Thank you, Ruhaan.
Thanks to you, Gayatri. This was wonderful. In fact, I'm actually stepping in only to respond now to number of comments that have come in.
I can't see the comments. I don't know how to see the comments, but you please be my eyes.
And also, I'm going to actually pass on a lot of questions to you, Gayatri, to respond to, because a lot of those are right in the area of your expertise. Some of you have already covered. One of the points I do want to highlight here a little bit, not getting into the details of clinical depression, is about just using the labels itself. As the awareness about mental health increases, what happens is the access to different labels. By labels, I mean I have OCD, I have personality disorder, I am bipolar. Somebody just gets angry over something, somebody's mood just changes, doesn't make them bipolar. Somebody wants to keep a coffee cup in a certain place, does not make them have an OCD. You wake up sad for 3 consecutive days. You had a breakup, you feel sad, does not make you depressed. So while the awareness, yes, Gayatri, I'll just
yeah, sure.
Yeah, or unless you're giving me an Ashirwad or something.
No, I'm not. Later.
Okay. So, it's important to just remember that we can't use the labels loosely. What it happens is it trivializes the real issue. And that actually also is an important sort of point to remember, that when we talk about certain conditions, it's good to just acknowledge that there is a mental health condition. It does not always have to be accompanied by a label. It also does talk about, when I personally see how the recovery looks like or what is the approach to recovery, as Gayatri also mentioned, one part is medical, another part is social. Typically an eclectic approach is something that one should look at, a holistic approach to recovery. Somebody was just saying in the comment, does yoga help? Of course helps. Does something else help? Of course helps. But there isn't yet a prescribed sort of set, as Gayatri was also saying, and I just want to highlight it, is that we are yet to arrive at do these 5 checklists and you will be better. First, we have to also understand what does recovery look like in mental health conditions, right? And Gayatri can also say about it. We have talked about it. In fact, that's one of our bonding points, that recovery is not linear. You will have many ups, many downs, and particularly when it comes to mental health conditions, recovery can be a long-term process. So to that extent, your commitment to getting better is extremely important. That doesn't mean that the responsibility of getting better lies alone with you, for all the reasons Gayatri just said. Do you have a workplace that respects your condition? Does it actually make an active effort to accommodate your condition and yet celebrate your presence? These are some of the things which also equally matter. You can do as much yoga as you want, but you won't recover if you're going back to a place which is adding to your stress every single day. So some of these challenges we have to acknowledge. There is no sort of conspiracy going on around this, right? We are all becoming aware of it. We have just suddenly started talking about mental health in the last few years, which was a topic remained restricted to the academic circles. Yes, Gayatri, just 1 second. Yes, please come in.
Sorry.
Please come in.
Oh, okay. All right. Thank you. I have something to say from also again from a lived experience of so my trigger to questioning whether I have a mental illness was actually getting a PhD in psychology, which is very ironic. If I ever write a book, I would write a book about like how a PhD in psychology gave me depression. But having said that, the first time I went and met my psychiatrist and my therapist, both of them were like, put all your arms down. Everything that you know about psychology, just put it down. Okay. Just like, and it so used to happen during therapy that I would just come up with, oh, you're talking about this aspect of CBT. Oh, and he's like, put it down. Like, let all your guards down, and it's going to come. It is there. You have studied it. But right now you don't have to have that added burden of being a psychologist. Okay. You are right now need to just focus on recovery. Like, how are you going to stick to your course of medication, and how are you going to come and see me for therapy sessions at whatever intervals we have decided. Second, this thing of it is self-diagnosis is like WebMD. Okay. Don't just don't. You don't. I went wrong in diagnosing myself also. So seek help. Okay. We as much as possible, we will help you, orient you in the right direction. We've already shared, and I'll share it again, the list of therapists who offer pro bono or services at lower costs. The third and the most important thing is language. I am schizophrenic, or I am I'm depressed. No, I live with depression. There's a difference between I live with schizophrenia and I'm schizophrenic. I'm bipolar. Oh yeah, morning I was feeling this, evening I'm feeling this, so I'm bipolar maybe. No, if you have a proper diagnosis from a psychiatrist, from a medical professional, you start living with that illness. Okay. You live with cancer, you live with diabetes, you live with other, I don't know, a fractured leg for all I care. Similarly, you live with a mental illness, you live with depression, and you live with bipolar disorder, and you live with schizophrenia. So it's very, very important to change this public discourse around, so that does not trivialize it. So if I say that, no, yeah, I'm just depressed, and I say that, no, I've been living with depression, I'm sure you guys see the difference between the way I have framed the two sentences. So yeah, these are the three things that I think are important to understand.
Thank you, Gayatri, for coming in on that. A couple of very important points to make here, just connecting to what Gayatri was saying. I think it's all actually convincing the convinced. I do believe that all the participants are very, very much evolved going by the comments. None of the mental health conditions are a sign of weakness, which is something that it takes a lot of time to break that barrier, including the self-stigma that I have a condition, hence something is wrong with me. So what Gayatri said is extremely important. I am not depressed. I have depression. I have a condition that I live with. And couple of sometimes, if it just makes it easier to understand, if you have diabetes, does I am diabetic become the singular identity you have? No. You can have your personality, you can have your identity, and you can still have a active mental health condition. So it is as normal and as simple as that. Second, as Gayatri was saying, that just because your academic qualification, including it in psychology, does not make you immune to any mental health condition. It can make you only as immune as a medical doctor is immune to cold and cough. Is a doctor sort of maybe better equipped or better informed about the condition, does not make them any immune to any of the medical conditions, right? So it's as simple as that. Many therapists seek therapists. So that's absolutely true. Uh, Something that we need to keep in mind. Somebody in these comments, Gayatri, above, had made a very important observation about children these days, talking about mental health conditions and talking about depression, and students, particularly school going students. You know what? This is extremely important. One part of it, when I wear my educator hat, and I do spend most of my time in education and conduct a lot of sessions for school going children in the age group of 12 and 13, group sessions, which have absolutely nothing to do with mental health, by the way. But quite often, the first thing that students talk about is how they are not feeling great, how they are feeling sad, how they are not exactly up to the mark in academics, and something is bothering them. They don't know what's happening. The vocabulary doesn't exist, not just with them, but also with their parents. And personally, my experience has been while talking to 12 or 13-year-old students one on one, the challenge or the barrier to recovery quite often are the parents, because that's where really the help is required, that's where really the support is required. But quite often the child becomes a problem child, the child becomes a misbehaved child, the child becomes a bully. No, at the age of 12 or 13, your personality is still developing to fit you into any diagnosis. Honestly, your parents need a diagnosis and they actually need a lot of help. I mean, I'm just being silly here, that your parents actually require a good tip on parenting. That quite often at the age of 12 or 13, the Indian parenting, and I'm of course stereotyping it here a little bit, is of suppressing any voice of the child and under the name of disciplining them. Be hard, be tough, be you have to do this. I have done much worse than this, yet reached where I have reached in life. This is actually really just emotional and emotional invalidation. And if you ask me, one of the important factors at that age group is emotional invalidation that actually leads to aggravating the problems which might be there. So it's very, very important, both in schools, but schools can only do as much. There is an important role that the parents have to play when it comes to mental health of children and students. How many tuition classes are you sending them to? If you ask a schedule of a typical 12, 13-year-old student today, the language that quite often parents talk to me is that I have invested 15 lakh rupees in his 12th standard. He better become a doctor. So what does the child do from 6 o'clock onwards to night 9 o'clock in the night? That child is carrying the burden of becoming a doctor, and basically, in without saying it, he is paying the debt of 15 lakh which he didn't ask for. So we have to see what are the burdens we are putting on our children, and certainly there is a lot of hope there. They have their entire lives ahead of them, and schools and parents both have an extremely important role to play, particularly when it comes to adolescent mental health. It's really, really important. I
Uh,
think.
I just want to pitch in a little bit here. Taking into consideration the context is very, very important. And I'm very like I'm very aware of using the word diagnosis and like get jumping directly like this might be the problem, that might be the problem. But it's just a question that I would like to even ask everyone, since the pandemic happened and everybody was locked into their rooms, especially children, cannot go out, play, fight with their peers, do that maramari masti, this and that. Do you think symptoms of ADHD must have come up? And does that mean we medicate them for ADHD and put them into therapy for ADHD? I just want the focus to be brought on how an individual interacts with their immediate environment. Situations, circumstances have changed. Our behavior is bound to change. We will respond to the changes that occur in our environment as climate change will hit us, our behavior is going to change. It is absolutely going to change. There is no, and I'm sure there'll be climate scientists here who might pitch in. And this is something very, very important that I wanted to share with you, that unlearning is one of the most important things in progress. So uh, my recovery started with unlearning all the, pardon my French, the bullshit that I had been taught, not just through family structures, but through WhatsApp. I'm kidding. Through school, through colleges, institutions. This is how a girl should be. Oh, you're going to live in Paris. That means you're going to be like this. You're going to be like that. Whatever. And I was absolutely all that they were saying, because I was I was being myself. But yes, it does, it starts ticking in your head, and you start asking questions to yourself, and then from there it's a slippery slope. So yes, there need to be interventions for at school level, um, including teachers, because they're very, very important aspect of a child's growth. I have had traumatic teachers in the past, and like, even if I were to close my eyes and remember, I know who has hit me and who has not hit me. At the age of 34, I can tell that to you, that I was in third standard and this person hit me. So these things are very, very important, and there need to be interventions, including parents, teachers, and absolutely the student, because they need to feel like they have skin in the game. I am against making laws without actually asking people for whom those laws are going to be made. So at any psychology conference I have been to, I'm like, where are the patients? Like, you are discussing about what are the symptoms of behavioral addiction, but I need to talk to someone who's actually addicted to a cell phone. And just because everybody, like, how do you come to that? So we need to listen to voices of patients. We need to listen to those who are marginalized. You come up with the Trans Act without having inputs from the trans community. You have the new Environmental Act coming up without actually listening. It's anti-people, it's anti-environment. You're not taking into account people's voices. So who are you making that law for if it is not going to benefit the people that it is intended for? This is something that I think you guys can teach me, and I would love to learn it from you all. There, I can see the comments now. I don't know how, and there are some personal.
So now the only thing is we have 3 minutes left in the session. So what I do want to just encourage Gayatri, sorry to don't want to cut you off here.
No, cut me.
Want to do is actually it's only unfair that we would only speak and show ourselves on the camera, but not let anybody else speak. People have been extremely patient in putting comments on the chat box. Some of you had raised hands. Could you please raise your hands again so that I can actually just get you on the camera and speak to everybody else? If as we conclude in the next 5 minutes, I know the topic like this can go on and on. There is so much to talk about it. Actually, that's also the reason why we started this in the first place, this session. And extremely thankful to CCS for actually taking this topic slightly off their topics list. So really amazing about that. There is no real conclusion, isn't it, Gayatri? What do we like sort of, this is just the start of the discussion, right? There is no real.
Yeah, no, as I mean, just hold the spade of social justice. That's where we can begin.
Yeah.
Just hold that spade of social justice and start digging. And there is more that we don't know of, and that is how we'll know of. That's it.
Yeah. And as we said consistently, lots of people have asked, where are the spaces to talk about these issues on the on a, honestly, do you need a platform? You can be the platform, is what I'm saying. Like, you start talking about it yourself, break the stigma, talk about it. I'm not putting the burden of action onto yourself, but I'm encouraging you to do it. Some of these things when Gayatri talked about her personal experience, a lot of this goes back to being queer in a workplace, or being a different person in the workplace, which is where I come from and which has been my experience, that you are accepted. The burden of being normal is always on you. Without doing that, I also do feel that you don't need a particular day. You don't need a pride march. Walk every day with pride. And how can you start making that happen? Do not be ashamed of what you are. The condition doesn't define you. you are much bigger than the condition. And the platform for talking about it, where is the right platform? The right platform is you. Seeking help is the right platform. Talking to people is the right platform. It's not easy. It's not easy to talk to your family. The family doesn't get it all the time. We have to live with it. Gayatri, please weigh in. Please come in here as well. I
Uh,
uh,
I also of the opinion that uh, how much do I talk? Like, so I really, because when he told me that there are students from a legal background, advocacy, policy making, education, economics, etc., etc., I really want to see transdisciplinary, multi-sectoral interventions that we can test. Like, we understand the situation, that what is the situation in Vidarbha, for example, in Maharashtra. If we were to talk about farmer suicide, what is the context in urban spaces related to domestic violence? What is, like Ruhaan said, in schools, what happens when children talk about their mental health with whatever limited vocabulary, and have a multi-sectoral approach? Because honestly, my knowledge of psychology stops after a point. When an individual has to go back into the society, there are other systematic determinants, social determinants that are going to affect that individual. So I can come as someone who can talk about how an individual can change his behavior at a personal level, but I need people who will tell me, no, this is a financial safety net that we can probably consider. This is the policy making that we can apply in this particular context. This is the advocacy. This is the communication that we might need, the language that will go around, because the way in different villages, different people speak is not the same that the DSM talks about. So we need language experts there. We need communication experts there. And it's not one person's job, and it's not a job done overnight. It's going to require persistent efforts all the time, and with everyone in it. So yeah, I'll probably conclude with that.
No, that's a wonderful point, and that's also where we do want to sort of conclude uh, without sort of repeating what we have already said to all the 80, 85 plus participants who are already there and still there in the room. One simple point that without selling any dream of recovery or anything, what I can certainly say is that recovery is possible in all mental health conditions. It's absolutely possible. Majority of the mental health conditions have an excellent prognosis. Some of you people have expressed helplessness in the comments as well, that you're feeling helpless, you're not able to overcome your condition right now. Trust that that also is very much a symptom of a mental health condition, that you feel that you will never get better. Somehow do convince yourself, when all of you're not alone in this. Lots of people have really managed their conditions very well, have lived wonderful lives with their mental health condition. It's absolutely possible. Just embrace the path. Understand that the recovery won't look like a highway every day. It is a bumpy ride, yet it is a ride forward, right? So it's a journey forward. So just keep that journey in mind, and keep moving forward.
Can you please share our email addresses, that last slide where
Quickly share our email addresses and Instagram handles. As I said, if you do need help, if you want to know just where to start, shall I go to a psychiatrist? Shall I go to a psychologist? As long as it doesn't involve, shall I go to a healer of any this thing? I think we are fine. We will be more than